All right. I think the clock is running, and there's now 45 minutes between you and the party. Appreciate everyone showing up, and I truly mean that as we are at the last session of the last day. Hopefully everyone had a great conference. All right. Hopefully we can leave you with one more good session here. And yeah, thanks for sticking with us for this last one. But I'm Josh Caplan. I lead product management for OneLake at Microsoft. And Charles Webb's going to join me on stage in a few minutes. And we're here to talk about OneLake. Now, when we talked to organizations, we saw that they had these visions of these very pristine data lakes. They saw them as one place to land all their data, whether it's structured or unstructured. They saw it as a place where they could break down data silos, because it's in one place. Everything is there. You can be blended together. It can be analyzed together. Because it's all there in one place, you don't have to go looking for it. It's easy to discover. It's easy to share. It's easy to secure. It's easy to manage. This was the vision. The reality, though, analytics with data lakes is a lot like file sharing prior to OneDrive and Dropbox coming along. Anyone remember how we used to share files? Yeah, you'd go get these network file shares. You'd set up these servers. You put some folders on there. You'd store some files on there. And you'd put some permissions on those folders. And it shared files. It works. It shares files. But you're basically building a solution on top of storage. Data lakes are very much the same way. You don't buy a data lake. You buy storage. And then you implement a data lake pattern on top of that. And very soon, this vision of a very pristine data lake goes out the window. And you tend to end up with more siloed lakes. And this happens for many reasons, some of them technical, but a lot of them are just people and process. It's easier to go stand up your own storage, do your own thing, and not have to coordinate with other teams and coordinate on standards and all agree on the same patterns that you're going to implement. So you end up with these multiple siloed storage accounts. Now, what do you got to do? You want to get back to that vision that you had before, so you got to break down these silos. And the easiest way to do that still is through data movement. Copying data, co-locating it with the other data you need. And even once you break down these silos, get the data together, still most users, most applications can't work directly over the data. So you build a serving layer. Cubes, data marts, data warehouses. And these don't just reference the data in the lake. They're copies of the data in the lake. And often they're copies of the data in the lake. You show up in a meeting, two people presenting the same number, but the number's actually different. Anyone actually experience that? Happens. Anytime you have two numbers, it can happen. And 2 would be a good number. Often it's a lot more than that. Multiple copies of the same data all need to be secured, governed, kept up to date. And you have to build systems and processes to make this happen. It's a lot of work, but it's a lot of value when you get it done at the end of the day. So with OneLake, we want to do for data lakes what OneDrive did for file sharing. OneLake will give you a data lake as a service, give you that value out of the box without you needing to build it. And if you think what OneDrive, SharePoint all did for file sharing, it starts out as a SaaS service for file sharing. And it goes much beyond that. It becomes a way to collaborate over files. It becomes a way to share files. So you've had OneDrive for your documents now for many years. Now you're going to have OneLake for your data. And we have a blank slide for some reason. Interesting. OK. So let's see how this works. So you'll only ever have one. Excuse me. You'll only ever have one OneLake per Fabric tenant. We spent a lot of time naming it, so we can't give you more than one. But you'll never have 0. You'll never have more than one. And that's literally by design. You can never get into a situation now where you create these multiple siloed lakes that can't talk to each other. Just like Office, right? You have one Office tenant. You have one Fabric tenant. It comes with one OneLake. Nothing to provision, nothing to set up. It's just there. And we have a unique value that comes with a SaaS service that we didn't really have in the PaaS world, and that's this concept of a tenant. With a tenant, we know where your organization begins and we know where it ends. So we can have this governance boundary automatically that goes around your entire organization. And any data that lands within that boundary, any data in your organization can automatically land within that boundary and now be governed with out-of-the-box lineage, data protection, also data for certifications, any of the catalog integrations that we have will work on top of that data automatically. Now, it's the tenant admin that sets up that boundary, sets up those initial rules. But we don't want that tenant admin to be a gatekeeper. Right? So think about how in Office and in SharePoint, you don't have to go to your admin every time you want to create a Teams channel or a new document site. We have workspaces in Fabric. Workspaces allow different parts of the organization to now work independently while all still contributing to the same lake. Workspaces can have their own admins, their own access control, their own billing, even. And they inherit the rules set by the tenant admin by default, but can be further restricted based on the needs of the workspace. Now, everything can start to land in OneLake automatically. And OneLake spans the globe. So it's very important in your minds to separate storage from a data lake. Data lake is going to be made up of lots of storage. You don't have to see that. If you use OneDrive today, it's built on Azure Storage. You don't manage those accounts. You work with OneDrive. You manage OneDrive. You govern OneDrive. Same with OneLake. We're built on top of AWS Gen 2. We have hundreds of thousands of storage accounts right now that span the globe. And we constantly add them as needed. And if you have data residency requirements, data that must live in a certain location, you can assign your workspace to certain capacities and say, it's got to be in this region. And that's where that data will reside. We'll use different hardware across the world, but we'll virtualize it into one logical lake for you. And by default, we're going to store all your data in zone redundant storage in case something happens to that particular zone of a data center. You won't feel a thing. Optionally, you can turn on geo-redundancy and we'll actually replicate the data to another region in case there's a disaster in that region and we were to lose that data center. But all this is taken care of for you. The performance, the scale, the management of the actual resources, all done by us under the covers. You work with a data lake. That's that value out of the box. Now, we've talked about the data storage. It's the compute that actually makes things happen. So in Fabric, we don't just have one compute. We have lots of computes. We have lots of experiences. We have lots of what we call workloads. And they're powered by different engines. So all our data science, our data engineering is all powered by our Spark engine. The data warehousing workload is powered by our T-SQL engine. All the real-time intelligence is powered by our KQL engine. And the BI and Power BI is all powered by analysis services. All these now have been reworked to work over OneLake. And they will store their data in OneLake by default. All engines now will store their data in OneLake in 𝗬𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀 format. For tabular data, it will be in 𝗬𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀 format. Where a data lake will take any format. But we made sure that all our engines are working on top of the same open source Delta Lake format. This is important. Why? Because when they store their data in OneLake, not only are they all storing it there, but now they can read the data from any engine. And they can do this without any copy, any import, any export even. So for example, if I write data in a data warehouse, I can now read it using Spark natively. Don't have to go through the SQL engine to get it. Spark can go directly to storage and read it. This is also true of the new, the new direct lake mode in Power BI and analysis services. If you ever remember how you get data into analysis services, you either process it into memory, or you use what we call direct query, and you just kind of go off every time someone runs a query, go off and fetch the data and try to do that as quickly as possible. Direct Lake combines the best of both by skipping the import and just paging the data directly from OneLake directly into memory. So I can write data in our data warehouse, or I can write it with Spark, and I can just start building Power BI visuals directly on top of that with the same performance as import mode in Power BI, with the latency of Direct Lake. So this is really important. Why? Because a lot of times decisions are made about which platform to go with based on how you want to go build that platform, how you're going to go build that data. And so if you decide to go with SQL, if that's what your engineering team wants to do is build a data warehouse with T-SQL and load it with stored procs, they can do that. But you no longer have to tie that to how the data is going to be consumed. So data can be consumed any which way. So you're separating how the data is going to be created versus how it's going to be consumed. So how it's going to be created now becomes a matter of preference. If you're another data engineering team that wants to work with Spark and Python and notebooks, they can do that. All the same consumption experience will work on top of that same data. So let's actually take a look at this real quick. So here I am in Fabric. I'm looking at my list of workspaces. So it's really easy to create a new workspace. It's very lightweight. It's just a couple clicks. There's nothing actually gets provisioned. But I'll pick an existing workspace. Now here I see my data item. Data items are like lake houses, warehouses. We're going to go into the warehouse data item here. And I'll see in here I have a single table, a single schema, and some data in it. Now this should look like any SQL experience you've worked with before. It should look a lot like a more modern version of SSMS even, but in the web, and it's done on purpose. It should feel very familiar to you as a SQL developer. This is why we have different data items. They should feel very familiar to what you're doing, to what you're expecting. If you're expecting a data warehouse, it should feel, work, and act like a data warehouse. But with all that said, it's actually storing the data here in OneLake. And we can see it. So being the OneDrive for data, we're going to give you a OneDrive-like experience to be able to see the data in OneLake. And you can actually open up in Windows using our File Explorer, which requires 2 clicks. You'll see the same list of workspaces here, but they're folders now. Inside that workspace, I see that data item we were just looking at, the data warehouse. I go inside that data warehouse. I can see a section of tables. In that tables section, I'll see 1 schema and 1 table. I can add a second table. So I'll write a T-SQL script here. It creates a table, inserts some data, inserts 1 row here. We'll see it pop up here. Come back to the File Explorer, do a little refresh. There's our new table. Inside that table, there's Delta log. Inside the data folder there, we actually see a Parquet file here. That's what contains our rows. So I don't have to know how to write Delta Lake. If I can work with T-SQL, I can write data to OneLake. If I work with an application that knows how to work with T-SQL, it can read and write data to OneLake in open standard formats in Delta Lake format here. Let me create one more item here. And this time I'm going to create a lakehouse. The lakehouse is our most lake-like data item. And what I mean by that is anything you can do in an ADLS Gen 2 container, you can do here really in a lakehouse. It supports both structured and unstructured data. Want to be a data lake, you got to support both. So we have this file section, we have this table section. The table section, the file section, we will take any type of data. So let's go really unstructured here. Let's take some images. So I have some images sitting locally on my machine. I'm just going to copy them in to this lakehouse here. And all I have to do is copy and paste directly in Windows. Another great thing about the Windows Explorer, any application that knows how to save a file in Windows can actually save data to OneLake. Just file save as, put it in this directory. It'll show up now in OneLake. Come back here to Windows, or sorry, come back here to the web, and we'll see those same files in here, images, completely unstructured. Now there's lots of things that can give you tables. And the nice thing about the lakehouse here is it'll let you load it your way. You can use our Spark engine to do it, but you can bring your own engine. You can bring in Fivetran, you can bring in Databricks, you can bring in HDI. Anything that knows how to write data to OneLake can write to OneLake if it knows how to write to ADLS Gen 2. And if it knows how to write Delta Lake, those will be automatically recognized as files. To get started there, you can actually just right-click on that tables folder, and you'll see under properties, you'll see the path to that OneLake location. And you pop this into any service or tool that understands how to talk to ADLS Gen 2. What we did is we built OneLake on top of ADLS Gen 2, but we also exposed the same APIs and SDKs to try to get this compatibility. So you don't have to worry about different storage accounts, which one you're going to connect to. There's only ever one storage account for your tenant, and that's OneLake. Inside that storage account, you're going to see all your workspaces showing up where containers would normally be. So in the URL to get to that workspace, you're going to put the workspace name where the container is. And then it's just the path to your data item from that point forward. So let's talk about the file formats in here. Like I said, you can put any type of file you want in OneLake. I've been talking a lot about Delta Lake, and we've been calling it Delta Parquet. Why do we call it Delta Parquet instead of Delta Lake format? Well, the data itself is actually stored in Parquet. The metadata is what's in this Delta Lake format, and that's on top of it. And that's a really important thing to understand because other formats also store their data in Parquet, particularly Iceberg. So one of the things we're announcing is that OneLake will soon support both Delta Lake and Iceberg. And what that means is every table in OneLake, whether you write it in Iceberg format or you write it in Delta Lake format, we will automatically translate that into the other format. We don't copy the data, Because again, the data is still in Parquet. That's the same format. We just translate the metadata virtually for you. So any table in OneLake, you'll be able to access using either format. What does this mean? Well, this opens us up to another ecosystem. Snowflake, for example, we announced an expanded partnership with them this week to do data interop. Since we'll now be able to understand the same file formats, we'll be able to seamlessly use the same data without any data movement or any data duplication. This now opens us up to the entire ecosystem of Delta Lake and Iceberg. Let me show you what this will look like now when we complete this expanded partnership with Snowflake. So, by the way, who's using both Snowflake and Fabric in their organization? Just Snowflake? Just Fabric? Okay. If you are using both, it's important that these don't become silos of data. All right? Today, they would be silos. They'd be in different storage formats. They wouldn't be able to talk to each other. But if I have data in one and I need to use it with data in another, I can now combine those. So let me actually start in Snowflake. I'm going to create a new Snowflake database here. And you'll see I'll now have an option to store this data in Iceberg format. When I select that format, not only will it store it in Iceberg format, it'll let me pick a Fabric workspace to store this data in. And that's where our data in OneLake is going to get stored. Setting that up, I can create a new table. We'll give the table a name. And you'll see by default, it's going to store it in OneLake in that workspace. It's already set up for me. All I have to do now is create the table. I'm going to create it from a file, upload some data along with it. I'll verify the schema here and say, OK, got some rows inserted. Now I can see the table. I can see the data here in Snowflake. Flipping over to Fabric, though, going to that same workspace we just connected to, we see a Snowflake database here now in Fabric. Going into that Snowflake database, we're going to see that same table. Now, that's stored in OneLake in Iceberg format, loaded right here. Now, I can combine this with other data that's already in Fabric. I use shortcuts to do this. Shortcuts let me virtualize data across different domains and different clouds. So I made some shortcuts here to data that's already in OneLake, and this is stored in Delta Lake format. So now I'm mixing Delta Lake and Iceberg. But I can see it all here in Fabric. Not only that, when I switch over, because of this translation, when I switch over to Snowflake, I can see it all here too. Not only can I see it, I can query it. Not only can I query it, I can query it across it. So here I'll do a join between data that was written natively from Snowflake, data that's written in Delta Lake format in Fabric, and I'll join them together and get our results. Same is true when I do it in Fabric. All this data is available to all Fabric engines, so I'll open up a new Spark notebook here, I'll run some Copilot, and I'll look for some outliers. Doesn't matter what format it was written in. I can use Power BI on top of this in direct lake mode. And finally, since OneLake's integrated with Excel and Office, I can use the OneLake Data Hub to find data in Excel. Doesn't matter what format it's written in. I can use it right here. You don't have to worry about the formats anymore. Different platforms are going to take bets on different formats. We're going to handle the translation back and forth, so you can just use it with all those platforms. And we believe so much in these open formats. We've made all our data available in Delta Lake format already. We're going to support Iceberg as the other open format, but we're also going to make sure that the translation between the two stays open. So we're participating in a project called Apache Xtable, which is an open source project that actually handles the translation between the two formats. You heard me mention shortcuts before. Let me give you a little overview of what's new with shortcuts. And if you don't know what a shortcut is, if you ever worked with Windows and you've created a shortcut there, it's a lot like that. It's a pointer. It points from one file location to another and makes it appear like that other location is now in the shortcut location. So for example, if I have data in a warehouse and I want to make it appear in my lakehouse, I don't have to export it to the lakehouse. I don't have to make a copy of it. I just create a shortcut to it, and it'll look like it's physically there, but no data has been copied. Same is true if I want to copy it across different workspaces, different domains. I can create a shortcut instead of copying it. And the data will appear in that other workspace as if it were physically there. But we haven't changed the ownership of the data. The owners of that data are still the owners. They still maintain the data freshness. They still maintain the security, just like a regular shortcut would be. Someone else can just use that without having to worry about, is my data up to date? Am I working on the freshest data? Now, that's how shortcuts work within OneLake, but we also have multi-cloud shortcuts that can actually span clouds, span data that's in any open storage system that's not in Fabric. So let me show you this. You've hopefully seen demos in the past where we've created shortcuts from ADLS Gen 2. ADLS Gen 2, as well as Amazon S3 and Microsoft Dataverse. Google Cloud Storage, we recently added, as well as a whole host of S3 compatible sources. So anything that's S3 compatible, MinIO, Cumulo, and Dell ECS. There are actually dozens and dozens of S3 compatible sources out there. It became the de facto standard, really, for accessing storage. Now we can talk to all of them. So let me show you how you do this. We're coming to a lakehouse where I already have data shortcutted in here from Amazon S3, as well as Dataverse and ADLS Gen 2. Let's add some of these new sources. I'm going to create a new shortcut, and this time I'm going to point it to Google Cloud Storage. And all I have to do is put in the path to my storage and a key to access it. And once I do that, we now have this new graphical interface that lets you actually explore the storage directly from here. And you can pick the directories that you want to shortcut into OneLake. And you can pick more than one. You can pick, in this case, 2, but you can pick a dozen, 100, whatever you need. Create those shortcuts, say next, and they will show up in OneLake instantly. It'll look like the data's been copied. It'll feel like the data's been copied. No data movement has actually occurred. Let's create one more. You actually see it load here. Let's create one more. This time we're going to do it to Dell ECS. This is one of those S3 compatible sources. But there's something special about this Dell ECS source. Not only is it S3 compatible, it's actually running in someone's corporate network on premises, sitting behind a firewall. All I had to do to connect to this was I use the same on-premises data gateway that we use for Power BI, that we now use for pipelines in Fabric. I install that behind the firewall, and we're able to connect to it directly on premises, again, without any data movement or any data duplication. It shows up here instantly in OneLake. To prove that I didn't actually copy it, let's go back on-prem for a minute. Let's open up the Dell ECS tool here, and we're going to just take a bunch of folders that are sitting on my local machine and copy them to the servers that are sitting locally on the network. Nothing's moved to the cloud here, but we just put a bunch of new images in. Coming back here, I just refresh the screen. Everything's here. So we unified data here across clouds, across domains, and across on-premises without any data movement or any data duplication. I have one more, and that one's around data that's already in OneLake. So we could always shortcut the data in OneLake. That was how we started shortcuts. But what about if we have to go cross-tenants? Let's say I need to share data with another organization who's using Fabric. We can now use OneLake Data Share to do this. So let's say someone shared me some data from a different tenant. I'll now receive a notification. Oh, actually, before I do that, let's actually talk about, so shortcuts themselves are implemented at the lowest layer of the stack. So it's at the storage layer. So every engine on top of shortcuts doesn't even know it's a shortcut. They just think it's data coming from OneLake. It looks like data coming from OneLake. That means all the same features of every engine will work whether the data is a shortcut or not, whether it's coming from Amazon S3, whether it's coming from on-premises, whether it's coming from OneLake. Doesn't matter. It all looks the same to every engine who works on top of it. So we can join across all these sources. We can build Power BI reports in direct lake mode that work on top of these sources as if it was one set of data in one physical place. Now let me talk about the cross-tenant. If you need to share data across tenant, you can literally, we want to make it as easy as sharing the data in Office. So once it's shared to me, I'll get a notification and an invite to use that data. All I have to do is accept it. And once I accept it, I select where I want it to go. So I'll pick a lake house in this case. Pick the location of that lake house where that data is going to show up. And that's it. Data will appear there in seconds as if it was physically here. Again, didn't move, wasn't copied, still controlled by the other tenant. If they revoke my access, the access disappears. It's not like a copy of data that will still persist after that happens. So we can now go across clouds, across on-premises, across tenants without any data movement or any data duplication here. So all these sources are available today. Google Cloud Storage, Amazon S3, cross-tenant data sharing, and as of earlier this week, the shortcuts to on-premises are all available in public preview. And there'll be more coming. But shortcuts are great. So let's look at all the ways we got data into OneLake here. So we first looked at using the data warehouse to get data into OneLake. Right? Any Fabric workload will bring its data to OneLake, including the 100+ connectors in Azure Data Factory. Any application that knows how to work with these workloads can bring data to OneLake or read data from OneLake. Any API, any application that knows how to work with AWS Gen 2 APIs can directly work with the storage layer of OneLake without having to go through another engine. Then we talked about shortcuts. So data that's in open file formats, in open file systems, we don't want you to have to copy into OneLake. You can shortcut those, virtually putting them into OneLake. We support now a bunch of sources that we just talked about. But what about data that's not in an open storage system or in an open file format? This is where mirroring comes in. And then Charles Webb's going to come on stage and give us an overview of mirroring. Somewhere.
Thanks, Josh. Appreciate it. All right. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, especially at the end of your day. We really appreciate it. I'm a principal PM lead for the data warehousing capabilities in Microsoft Fabric, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the data warehousing capabilities, shortcuts, and a number of other announcements that we've made over this week. But first, I want to just kind of segue. We've heard from Josh about how OneLake specifically helps you alleviate your traditional analytics challenges. And data warehousing in Fabric can help you accelerate analytics to that last mile. So everything from helping you get the discipline at the core and the flexibility at the edge, helping you grow your BI adoption, helping you make decisions with data and deliver reporting, analytics, and AI solutions. This is what we made the warehousing capabilities in Fabric for. And when we look at the Fabric capabilities as a whole, data warehousing is just another element of that. So it's still built on top of OneLake. It still can be governed by Purview. It's still got AI built in with things like Copilot, which we will touch on later. But it's a core part of what makes Fabric Fabric. Now, one of the things that makes the data warehousing experiences a little bit different in Fabric is that we built these experiences for everyone. So Build, as you know, is a developer conference, but we're really focusing on how can we deliver a capability that lets anyone be a developer of any skill set. So whether you're an analyst or a business user or a data engineer or a data scientist, we really focus on making anyone have the skills to be able to build data warehousing and get value out of a data warehouse solution. And this is really different than anything else on the market today. So first, I want to talk to you a little bit about these developer experiences and put what I just said in context. And Josh mentioned mirroring is one way to get data from your proprietary data sources that you may have. How many of you folks use things like Azure SQL DB? A lot of hands raised. What about Cosmos DB? Things like AI applications, building RAG, things like this. And of course, many of you have data in multiple clouds, like what Josh touched on. Now, mirroring is one of those things that helps you get data into the data warehouse easier. And while we have a multitude of ways to get data into the data warehouse, everything from SQL, stored procedures, pro-code data integration with things like pipelines, no-code experiences with things like data flows, we're going to touch on the zero ETL ways to get data in. This is a scenario where you don't have to be a plumber and build pipelines. You can accelerate the way that you get your data with mirroring. And so what this allows you to do is just seamlessly sort of connect your databases and any of your data warehouses that may be popular to OneLake, land the data there, and then build on this lakehouse-centric architecture that you've already seen everything in Fabric run on top of. So this means Azure SQL DB, Cosmos DB, and more. And once your data's in the data warehousing capabilities, this allows you to query across clouds and unlocks data science experiences, and of course, Power BI, clicky, draggy, droppy. Now, the next thing that I'm going to touch on a little bit here is Copilot. And how many of you have heard of our Copilot announcements across Build? Many of you are smiling, and that's fantastic, because what we're really making sure we're doing here is, of course, we have pro code and no code experiences in the warehouse, and of course, we already have deep AI investments at the engine layer within the warehouse itself, but we want to make sure we bring AI experiences into how you build a data warehouse, because for our developers, we want to make sure this is the best place to do your work. And so everything from exploring data, to writing code, to modeling your data, to finally going to the reporting layer can be done with Copilot assistance. And we're going to show you what that looks like. Essentially, anything that you need to do in terms of building a data warehouse, you can do with Copilot by your side. So whether you need to get data ready and prepare it, or organize, secure, model your data, to finally just discovering insights can be done with this paired programmer, this assistant by your side. Now, how many of you are developers, pure developers, that like to write code? And it turns out you're at Builds, you're at the right place. But we would be amiss to not show you some of the SQL sugar and investments we've been making at the SQL level to make sure that this is the best place to do your data warehousing. And so we're introducing time travel, a solution to how you might need to do historical data analysis with some very, very, very nice sugar to how you would develop and analyze your data over a period of time, or do troubleshooting, or even if you have stable reporting or compliance needs. And what this looks like, if you can see the highlighted code here, is really just an option label that you add. And gone are the days of doing time travel where you need to make multiple copies of the data, overwrite data. Now you simply say, hey, look, as I'm writing a query, I want to look back at the last 7 days, and with this option clause, you can do that. Which means you also don't have to specify per table in the queries and the joins when you actually need to have the data as of. You can just do it at the very end of your statement. So I know all of you are here to actually see what this all looks like. You're here for the demos, not the slides. So let's just jump in. How many of you have used data warehousing in Fabric already? I see some hands raised, and that's amazing. One of the things we're going to show you here is how you can get data into the data warehouse, and I already talked about the no-code and the pro-code capabilities. But there's also mirroring, and Josh touched on mirroring a bit. But essentially, mirroring is the way to start getting your data from any of these popular sources that you see here. How many of you, again, are using Azure SQL? Cosmos? Other sources, like what you see here? Great. So let's make sure this is working. All right. So we're going to walk you through what it actually looks like and takes to go mirror your data. And we're going to actually start with one of these sources. Anyone tried mirroring so far? Anyone had a chance to check out this capability? See a few hands raised. Fantastic. So to mirror your data, it's pretty simple. What you do is you select a source. And after you select a source, it's as simple as signing in. So what you see here is we've provided some connection information. And the next step is you can now very simply see your objects. And when you select the objects, what we're doing is we're connecting to those objects. We're allowing you to preview them. And then once we've selected what we want to mirror, it's as simple as giving it a friendly name. So maybe this has a nomenclature based on how you've delivered the capability in Azure. And you want to give it something friendly so that when you're querying it, it makes sense. Now, once you do that, you're done. What we're doing now is we're landing all the data in OneLake for you. And after we've landed that data in OneLake, you can start to monitor and see all that data coming in. So any changes that happen are very easy to see. And we're actually keeping all your data in sync. So any changes, inserts, updates, deletes are managed for you. Now, secondarily, once we've done that, that allows you to start querying your data right away. Now, the data's in OneLake, but it's also now transformed in a tabular format, which means that as I want to query it, it's as simple as running a SQL query. And you can see here, this is just your friendly T-SQL. Now, as you're analyzing data, you might say, you know what, I've got data from another database that I want to analyze. And similarly, it's very easy to get data from now Cosmos DB. Now, we know that Cosmos DB has data that is documents. This may be JSON documents or otherwise. And once you know how to mirror your data, you know how to mirror your data across any data source. So very similarly, we sign in. And after we sign in, it's as simple as either providing a connection name that you already have or using the existing one. But then all your documents are right there. Once you selected the documents or the whole database, again, it's as simple as saying connect. And then we handle all of those pipelines, landing the data. It's truly zero ETL, which means that, again, it's as simple as connecting to your data. Now, the monitor experiences are also the same affordances that you'd be used to, but very importantly, we've gone from structured data to unstructured data. And of course, all this data will also get structured for you in the warehouse with nothing you need to do. Now, lastly, we support sources that are non-Microsoft. So of course, your most popular data sources that you might be keen on, you can also mirror. And we're going to do the exact same thing that you saw before, which is to make sure that we're landing that data, keeping it in sync. We're using the CDC technology of the data source behind the scenes to make sure that everything is kept very neat for you. And this is really accelerating time to value. To do this today requires a massive amount of cognitive overload to figure out what's the different source, how am I going to keep it up to date and in sync, and then lastly, how am I going to start to work across all these different data clouds and query the data in the same place? And because OneLake is a single SaaS environment, we've landed all the data in OneLake, it now becomes very easy to see all my data, monitor all my data, and then finally query all my data in place. Now, the next step in my journey may be to say, you know what, I've got data from all of these different clouds and environments, but now I want to really analyze it at scale. And I showed you previously the Copilot capabilities, but now let's see what it looks like live. So we can create a new warehouse on the fly. And what's neat about this is now we can connect to those same mirrored databases that we had previously and do additional things to deliver downstream analytics value. So you can see how easy it is now to select those same databases that we mirrored previously. And now if we want to do cross-database queries, write stored procedures, create views, we can do so very easily in a very familiar SQL environment. And you can see here as we navigate through, all those databases that we mirrored are now simply in the Object Explorer and available for us to do additional deep dives. Now, we can also leverage Copilot. And if we don't have the skills of a SQL developer and we wanted to analyze data at scale, we can ask Copilot for help. And when we ask Copilot for help, because we're leveraging responsible AI, we're going to, of course, fulfill your request, but do it in a way where it's highly transparent. We're going to tell you how we plan to execute that query. We're going to give you the query to kind of review. And then after you're ready, you can run it at your own speed. And so we accelerated the time to value here, but we still give you the power as a developer to do what you need to do. And if you didn't have those superpowers, we just up-leveled you. Now, the next step in this journey may be that you want to continue to analyze your data, and you may continue to want to analyze data across different environments. And of course, Copilot's smart enough to know all the different databases that you maybe have queried already. Now, at some point, you might say, I also saw some really nice SQL sugar, and I also want to be able to write code kind of like GitHub Copilot. I really enjoy that capability. And just like GitHub Copilot, I can add context and comments into the SQL text editor, and then you can see, boom, the Copilot will actually complete the code for you. So as a developer, as I'm typing, and I enjoy that experience where I type and tab, and I have all of that intelligence and auto-completion just built in, we have the same thing here. So we have multiple modalities to work with Copilot and AI inside of this experience. You can also see the explain and the fix buttons that can be leveraged as I might need to understand how code works or to fix errors. Now, lastly, there are those scenarios where you need to look at data in the past. And this is where that SQL sugar that I was telling you folks about earlier comes into the picture. And so traditionally, to do something like this, I would have had to make multiple copies of the data. Maybe I had backups. And now, it's very simple to add that option clause and now query data as of a previous point in time. So I can look at data right before where I was, and then it's very easy to then go further and extend this to Power BI reports with one click from the data warehouse. And you can see now, if I wanted to do reporting, I wanted to look back just right before build, I could easily do that. And again, to do this in other platforms or solutions would either be copying the data or would mean literally specifying for each particular join the as of date. For us, it's just the option clause. So very, very powerful stuff. Now, when we look at data warehousing more, you can see that there's other experiences that we talked about, right? So now if you need to build a star schema, you can do that visually inside of this experience. And this is one of those things where when you start thinking about AI, data is the fuel that powers AI. So all these semantics that you can physically add to the data warehouse can now power your additional experiences like Power BI, which is deeply connected to the data warehouse, meaning this same report connected to those same tables that were modeled can now leverage Copilot, which is able to understand all those semantics. So to now go from data warehousing, where we copied data in using mirroring very seamlessly without writing any code, to then writing code with Copilot, to now a Power BI report was clicks. And you can see how Copilot aided us through that whole entire journey. Super powerful stuff. So now I want to take a step back and say, Fabric is reasonably new. We went to GA towards the end of November. And at the same time, we've had amazing momentum. We have thousands of customers growing daily. And this is fantastic. But I also want to call out the fact that everything that we've been doing is because of you, our customers. So one of the things that we do is we listen a ton to you and what features and functionality that you tell us we have to ship. And we ship every single day. And what this means is that if you want to take a step back and see all the things that we're trying to release, you can simply leverage our release plans, which are public. And you can see all the things that we plan to do by quarter so that you can effectively plan for all of this innovation that will always keep coming. Separately, it's very easy to get Microsoft Fabric. And the best part about this is that for our developers, of which there are so many in the room and so many out there, we offer 60-day free trials, which means no credit card. It means no Azure subscription. And it means we're giving you one of our most powerful SKUs to get started, meaning that you can go end to end, just like I showed you in minutes, but also think about all the innovation that you could deliver in 60 days. Now, for folks who have seen a lot of the amazing goodies that we've showcased here today, I also want to leave you with a few resources. There is aka.ms/fabric roadmap. That's where you can find all the goodies around what are we planning to do in the next few quarters. And there's also aka.ms/try_fabric. That's how you can get access to all of these things and try it for 60 days. Separately, I also want to call attention to 4 days of Microsoft learning, connection, and inspiration. We're going to have the product teams, engineering teams, and many more there to work with you and learn from you, and also show you all the new innovation we continue to ship daily. And this is in Stockholm. This is in Sweden. And this is coming very soon. So mark your calendars for the 24th to the 27th of September of this year. Now, thank you so much, all of you, for joining this session. We have a number of additional resources here. You can scan the QR code, and you can find out more details about this session on the details page. But I also want to say a huge thank you. We are keeping you from the end of the day, the long weekend, and I really appreciate all of your time here, spending it with us and learning more about Fabric, OneLake, and the data warehouse. So thank you so much.